Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our May California Brokers Business Accelerator on Staying in Your Lane and Why It Matters, hosted by our Northern California broker, Steve Rowe, but also featuring our other brokers, Jeff Green and Michelle Beeson. For the month of May, for every agent you refer over, you will earn a $20 Amazon gift card, up to $100, even if they don't join. Remember, to receive this $20 gift card, you first need to make sure that you have spoken with the agent and they are expecting a call from us to tell them more about Allison James. To refer an agent to us, please go to Allison James University and click on the Referrals tab. I want to show you a quick video of a new product that Allison James is offering through SharpTC. SharpTC is now offering a care package. These are for anyone who uses SharpTC. This care package is $400, and not only does the transaction coordinator take care of your transaction for you, but they will also send out a personalized gift box at closing, just like the one that you saw on the video, as well as personalized cards that have your name on it. Also included is a HUD-1 delivery to ensure your client is prepared for tax season. To learn more about this gift box and to get started with our care package today, please go to sharptc.com. Today's webinar is sponsored by our preferred lender, Movement Mortgage. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our California Brokers Business Accelerator. Remember, if you have any questions during this presentation, you can type them in the chat box on your Zoom control panel. I'll now pass it over to our brokers, starting with Steve Rowe. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, everybody.
How are you?
Good.
Good. You should be able to share your screen.
All right. How's that?
We're good to go.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to be able to talk with you. What I'm looking at today, we're calling it Staying in Your Lane. You know, the reality is it's just kind of a piece of risk management. And what we're talking about is focusing on paragraph 18 that's in the RPA, similar paragraph in each of the other purchase agreements. But it shows some limitations as to what you as an agent and what we as brokers are responsible for within a transaction. And so this is the focus. I want to show you, here's the paragraph itself that's out of the purchase agreement, and this section where it says scope of duty. It's kind of backwards, really, because when you think about scope of duty, you're thinking about what is it that an agent will do for the transaction. But it's really the opposite. It's what we will not do in the transaction. What we, it's basically a list of 11 either does nots or shall nots. But it's important for you as agents to understand that the paragraph is inserted into the purchase agreement as a protection. It's a protection for you. It's a protection for us as a broker. And it's designed to limit our liability, to limit our responsibility in the contract, and make sure that we are, allowing the other professionals that are involved in the transaction to be responsible for their areas of this transaction. The important point that I want to make just from this page is that the protections that this paragraph provides for us only help us if we actually stay within our lane. if we actually abide by these do nots and shall nots. If we start going beyond and we start asserting responsibility or expertise in areas that are outside the scope of our licensing, then we're going to be held responsible for beyond what the contract says we're going to. So it's important for us to understand these things, review it, and be aware of that. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through these 11 points, and I'm going to give you just a few tips about what they mean, how you're going to do that, and I'm going to ask at the end of each point for the other brokers to, come in and give us any further information that they have or any further thoughts that they have on those things. But again, it's important for you to understand what it is the contract says you're responsible for. Now, I'm going to start this a little bit backwards. I'm actually going to start with number 11, because number 11 in this list provides the context. It provides the reason why the other 10 items are listed in here. And number 11 says that we as brokers and agents shall not be responsible for providing other advice or information that exceeds the knowledge, education, and experience required to perform real estate licensed activity. And that last line is essentially the key element here. What is it required? What knowledge, education, and experience is required for you to operate in the realm of professional real estate activity? All right. The reality, and I'm going to jump down here to my number C point. The reality is virtually all of us have come from other walks of life. There's a handful of realtors out there that actually just went to school to become realtors and began real estate at a very early age. But most of us have come from other fields, from other walks, and a lot of times we've come from fields and professions that are related. My personal background involves a background in architecture and a little bit of background in insurance. So I do have actual professional expertise in some areas outside of my real estate licensing. Some of you have come from the lending industry, and you've got very strong understanding of lending and the financing end of it. Some of you have come out of law backgrounds. Some of you may have accounting backgrounds. And, many of you may have been involved in your own investing and working with others in investing. So we understand that many of our agents will have actual knowledge and expertise outside of the scope of the real estate license. But the warning here is for you not, when you're representing a client under your real estate license, you're not operating with the same hats as you used to operate on, and you need to be careful not to exert claims and to step over the lines and start providing advice and counsel in areas that are outside of the scope of your real estate license. Okay. We have the statewide buyer-seller advisory. I sometimes joke that we call that form the brokers know nothing form, because there's over 60 times in that document that says brokers do not have expertise in this area. And again, it's not meant to be an insult. It's not really meant to say that brokers don't know anything, but it's saying that we as brokers and as agents are only going to exercise our expertise in the areas that involve our real estate licensing. Any of the other brokers want to touch bases on that before we move on through that?
No, I don't have anything to add, Steve.
Neither do I.
All right. Well, let's just run through these, and they're pretty simple. They're straightforward. You probably heard it, from us and on various occasions. Number one just says that we as brokers and agents do not decide what price buyers should pay or the seller should accept. And some of you may be looking at that saying, well, obviously we're going to give them advice and counsel regarding the value of the home. And that's a different story. We do want you to do your homework. We do want you to do accurate CMAs. But what we don't want you to do is say you should offer X or you should accept Y. We're going to provide the information regarding what does the market tell us about the value of the home, but we're going to always phrase it in the form of an estimate of opinion and an opinion of value. It's up to the buyer, and you might use the market conditions advisory to help you with this one, where it makes it clear Buyers ultimately decide what price you're going to offer. Sellers ultimately decide what price you're going to accept. We're going to provide the best market information we have. And frankly, I think it's wise to give a value range rather than a specific number. You know, if the home might be, you know, you may be coming up with a conclusion it's worth $350,000. So I would say, you know, we're in the range of 340 to 360. But let them make the ultimate decision as to where they're going to go with their offer, and make that ultimately be responsible for the decision they make. Brokers?
That's a good point. Yeah, very good point. And it's very important that the market conditions advisory be used at the time they write the offer, not just thrown in as a later on document, you know, towards closing or whatever it is. It's very important language that needs to be used. It's also good form that and we require it used on the listing side. A lot of sellers are going to be in a position where, especially as prices go up, they're going to see a model match to their home, maybe selling for 30 or 40,000 more within a couple of weeks of their sale, and they're going to question you as an agent. And this MCA is great protection for that.
Right. And the important point that Jeff just mentioned is that, you know, the market conditions advisory is advice as to how to write your offer or before you accept an offer. The information that's there doesn't have any value after you've already entered into contract. It's giving advice about how to, you know, whether or not you should be entering into this contract. So that's a good point on that one. Number 2 on this one says that we don't guarantee the condition of the property. Contract makes it clear at the very beginning that brokers are not parties to the transaction. Even though if you are representing the seller, you're representing them, but you don't own the property. You don't have the knowledge and the experience with that property that it's going to take to properly represent the condition of that property. All you can do is advise your seller to make complete and accurate disclosure. And then when you're talking about the condition of that property, be sure that you're using the proper qualifiers, right? So I'm not going to ever say that a property is in good condition, because I don't know that. I don't have the ability to know that. I haven't had the experience with that property. I may say that it appears to be in good condition, but I'm not going to make an absolute declaration regarding the condition of that property. Sometimes you'll see in listings or in the MLS that, you know, there's a new roof or there's new carpet. But the reality is, the day after we put that carpet in, it's really no longer new. Now it's a day old. And so, you know, it's better to go in and say carpet was replaced in November, new roof was installed in July, and put those conditions on there so that you're not making representations that either you don't know about or you can't back up. You know, the transfer disclosure statement makes it clear that as the representative of the seller, we're supposed to talk to the seller about filling that out, making sure it's complete, encourage them to be complete. There's a form that was produced by CAR last year called the DIA, the Disclosure Information Advisory. And I really encourage all of you to be using that with your listings. And it gives some of that explanation as to how the seller is to fill out their seller property questionnaire and their transfer disclosure statement. But you don't do that for them, and you don't make your own representations regarding the condition of the property. Number 3 says we don't guarantee the performance, adequacy, or completeness of inspections, services, products, and repairs provided or made by seller or by others. And, you know, this is repeated in paragraph 23 in the RPA, and, you know, probably within the other purchase agreements as well. Even if we recommend a vendor, we might recommend an inspector or a lender or a pest inspector. We don't have any responsibility to guarantee their performance. Now, again, some of you may have come out of a background of construction, and you may believe that the building inspector didn't do an adequate job of inspection. You saw things that got missed. Well, encourage your buyer or your seller to talk to that inspector. But don't go in and act like the expert in those fields. Point them to the ones who have responsibility for those services and for those inspections. I don't have the ability, and most of us don't have the ability to adequately evaluate whether or not that inspection was complete or accurate. If the seller is going to do any repair work on their own, make sure, and this is spelled out in the contract as well, that they get it documented, who's doing the work, getting paid receipts. If the seller's doing it themselves, document what was done, what parts were used, and get those receipts. But you aren't responsible for guaranteeing what somebody else is doing. Brokers, what do you think?
I completely agree. And one of the things that we do in our territory is we have a list of inspectors that we've collected, and we encourage our agents to provide it to the client and say, hey, here's several people that do home inspections, several people that do pest inspections, several people that do pool, roof, etc. And rather than us having our own inspector in our pocket that we refer every time, this enables us to give the choice to the consumer. And we also encourage our agents to have it in email, so that not just for that client, but historically, you can show over time that you're not in the practice of referring specific inspectors, so that it avoids any kind of appearance of, steering or guiding inspectors or any kind of collusion. So it's good to just give them the choice. It's okay to have the conversation with them about what different inspectors do, but I think giving them all their options or multiple options is really helpful.
Sure. And part of what I've said here is, if you look at, if you're going through these inspections with your client and you suspect something got missed, talk to the inspector, have your client talk to the inspector, but don't provide your own critique at that point, because now you have taken the role of the inspector rather than letting them have responsibility for their work. Yeah. Number 4 says we don't have an obligation to conduct inspections of common areas or areas offside of the property. I found a little inspector picture here to kind of emphasize this one. And again, this has to do with maybe you're selling a home that's a condominium or it's in a homeowners association. You have a responsibility to do an agent visual inspection of the home itself, but not the clubhouse and the swimming pool and the various facilities and parks that may be part of the HOA. You can point your clients in those directions, have them do those investigations if they choose. Neighborhood conditions. One, never fall into the trap when somebody asks you, is this a safe neighborhood? Right? You cannot adequately answer that question. You may be in a neighborhood that hasn't had a violent crime in 30 years, but if a month after you close a deal, there's a violent crime in that neighborhood and you've said, no, this is a safe neighborhood, then you may be held responsible. Point them to the right sources, encourage them to spend time in the neighborhood at different times and different times of the day, different times of the week, but you're not going to do inspections and be responsible for giving them the information about things that are outside of the home itself. Oh, come on. All right, there we go. Not responsible for identifying defects on the property in common areas or off-site unless they're visibly observable by the inspection, reasonably acceptable areas. So this is what the AVID is dealing with. And you are responsible and under the law to do a reasonably competent visual inspection. But page 1 of the AVID gives you a list of things that you are not going to do as part of that inspection. Make sure before you go to do your AVID and you do that inspection, read through page 1. And so you're not turning on the appliances, you're not crawling onto the roof, you're not going into the attic or under the crawl space. Stay within the guidelines that are laid out there, and you're not a property inspector. You have a responsibility to identify visual, what you can see, and try to avoid doing any interpretation of what you see. Don't try to describe what the cause is. You might have the expertise to know what the cause is or have a great, suspicion. Just point out what's there and point them to their inspectors to find, to go further and give them interpretations. Brokers, what do you think on that one? All right,
I agree. I agree 100%.
Yeah, that was pretty straightforward. Not responsible for inspecting public records or permits, concerning either the title or the use of the property. And this is a common error. Agents want to be helpful. That's our life. That's our direction. And so, I've had times where I've seen agents going down to the building department and trying to determine whether an addition on a home was permitted. Those are things that are outside of the scope of your license. And I'll tell you, my experience with building departments is if you go and ask 3 different people the same question, you're going to get 3 answers. And if you start taking this responsibility on yourself, you're going to be held responsible not just for what you discover, but for things that you may have missed or for questions you didn't ask. So if you've got a client that's concerned about permit status, point them in the right direction. I've even had times where I've accompanied my client to the building department to assist. But let them get these questions answered directly. If you have a buyer who wants to add on to the property, maybe add another bedroom or do something, other additions, put an additional dwelling unit onto the property, point them in the right direction, get their answers directly from the officials who can give them that information. You're going to review the preliminary title report, and maybe you'll see some red flags there. But now again, if you see those red flags, point them back to the title officers to get the explanations that are satisfactory for those things. Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, this is really important because, when you go to, if you yourself as an agent went to the building department and got a response on a question or you or your buyer have, and you go back and relate that response to your buyer, you may have misinterpreted what the inspector said. The buyer may misinterpret what you're saying. There's just too many pitfalls here for you to take on that responsibility yourself. Like Steve said, put the client in your car, drive them down to the building department where the public records are, and let the client get the response firsthand. You just don't want to overstep your bounds on this because there are too many things that could go wrong and could really come back to bite you at a later date. That's all I have.
Yeah, and I have to say too, I have this come up more often. It's really kind of surprising how many agents think that this is a task that they should be doing. And it's just, again, beyond our scope. We shouldn't be getting information. It seems like once a week I'm telling people, don't call your client needs to do that. Don't you call the planning, don't do it. So it's just something we need to stay away from.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Number 7 says we're not responsible for identifying the location of boundary lines or other items affecting title. And it's a big question mark sometimes. Is the fence on the property line? Is that creek the back end of the property? And the reality is we don't know those things. Very rarely is a fence put up exactly on the survey line. So unless there's been a professional survey where the corners have been clearly marked and everybody can see them, don't make any representations regarding those things. Title insurance doesn't guarantee property lines unless you've purchased an enhanced policy and there's been a survey on those things. There's a paragraph A10 in the SBSA talks about this one to make sure that everybody is aware. But it's not uncommon at all for fences to be a foot or two off of the boundaries. Maybe they're the original property line in the back. If you're in a rural area, maybe it was a stream. But streams have a habit of changing course over the years. So the property line may have at one time been this side of the stream, and now it's on the other side of the stream. If there's questions on that, point them toward getting a survey, have them look at the mapping that shows property lines, but try to avoid making any absolute declarations. Make sure anything is to the best of the seller's knowledge, approximations of where these things are located. And again, if there are clearly marked corners, you can point those things out. Sometimes other title issues, you're going to have people ask you, well, are there water rights? Are there mineral rights? Is that easement on title? Is there, an encroachment? These are things, again, look at the title reports, send them back to their title officers. You might need to have an easement plotted by the title company, but don't make any direct assertions as to that exactly where these things are. Many times easements that are easy to draw on a flat piece of paper, for maybe a driveway or something like that. Many times those driveways go well outside of those easements just because of the topography of the land. So you want to be careful with those representations. Anybody else have some thoughts on that one?
No, I don't.
All right, how about not being responsible for verifying square footage? And, the tax records I find are quite often wrong. And, one of the things that you want to get into the habit of is identifying the source when you're representing square footage of the home or the square footage of the property. Say it's, per the assessor records, might be based on an appraisal report. Sometimes the seller will simply say, no, it's bigger than that. If the seller has evidence for that, and the seller, you can say, quote is per seller. Don't go measuring homes. I've had times where I've held the tape for my clients and let them measure the homes. But again, don't go into that process because you may, if you make a mistake in your measurements, you're going to be held responsible on those things. I've had situations where the home was very obviously misrepresented in the MLS. And I've had occasions where I've held the tape and let my buyer, discover that for themselves, or the sellers that discover that. But you want to be careful that, and again, my background is architecture. I have a pretty good sense of how to measure these things and how to determine the square footage. But I back away from those things when it's dealing with my clients. But one of the other caveat on that is never state or never publish information that you just know is not accurate. So the tax records might say this is a 1,500 foot home, but you might know from your experience of other homes in that tract or that area that it's really not 1,500 square feet. Then find another source or, talk with your sellers about this thing. But if you absolutely know the information is false, don't publish that. Any other thoughts there, guys?
I did want to add, especially when you're representing a buyer, to properly, when you see a discrepancy in what might be published in the MLS and say the appraisal in square footage, to make sure you properly document notifying your client that there's a discrepancy. There was a time early in my career back in fax machines when when there was a discrepancy between what was published in the MLS and then the appraisal said it was 300 square feet bigger. And luckily for me, I had written it out. I faxed it to the client. I had a cover sheet in my file, all of that. And about a year later, the client tried to sue me and my company for not telling him that there was a discrepancy. It turned out the appraisal was wrong. So if I didn't have that cover sheet and that proper documentation, just notifying that there is a discrepancy in what's published in the MLS and what the appraisal says, I would have lost, but it was dismissed immediately.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And it's not unusual for the appraisal to be 10 or 15 feet off from the public records. And
Right.
Not very many are going to argue with that. But what Michelle's saying, 300-foot difference, that's one that you want to make sure everybody's aware of in advance and document that.
Mm-hmm.
How about not determining the fair market value of the property, sort of related to that first one, or any personal property included. We get sometimes in these deals, and obviously we discourage you from putting a lot of personal property into a deal because lenders don't like to, do 30-year mortgages on a pool table or a lawn tractor. But sometimes those things get put in. Stay out of any of the discussion as to what those things are worth. Make sure that those are things that are determined by the buyers and the sellers. And even the value in the home, like we say, provide good CMAs and, but express it as an opinion and as an estimate of value, not as a declaration of what the value is. Even a very, professional appraisal, when it states a number for the value on that home, it is expressed as an opinion of the market value, and it's based on that market value on a specific date. Even the professional appraisers are going to hedge their bets. But obviously stay away from avoiding, making any decisions or making any declarations regarding the value of other personal property that might be included. Number 10, this one again, we beat this one often, and that is don't provide legal or tax advice. And again, you might know the answers when they ask you legal questions. In some ways we do get to practice law without a license, but it's only if we're staying within the parameters of our CAR contracts that have been reviewed and vetted by the legal attorneys, the CAR attorneys. We can provide, the CAR library has a lot of legal Q&As, and you can print those out, you can provide those to your clients, but don't get into the process of giving legal opinions, and trying to answer your questions. You don't need to know it all. And sometimes even if you do know it, you've got to be careful not to state it, and make sure that you are making referrals to attorneys and to accountants early and often. And if it's important enough issues, you may want to document that we made that recommendation, that they talk with the accountant. And you may have investment experience and the answers to their 1031 exchange questions, but you're better off pointing them to somebody who is working in that field, the accommodator, whoever it might be. So again, don't need to act dumb, but you do need to hold your tongue in areas that are outside of the scope of your licensing. Any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, what I see as a broker in my experience is that agents get clients and they want to be the be-all, end-all for information in providing to that client and providing good customer service. But keep in mind, in real estate, no good deed goes unpunished. So stay, as Steve said, stay within the boundaries of our license. Only do what we are responsible for and have a fiduciary responsibility for. And refer our clients to the people who are the experts, the attorneys, the accountants, the inspectors who have contractors license. Just make sure you stay within those boundaries and you'll be fine. Thank you, Steve.
We've already talked about number 11. And again, this one just kind of sums it all up, that we need to stay within the areas that are based on our knowledge and expertise required to perform licensed real estate activity. So let me just kind of wrap it up with this one. Make sure that every once in a while, as you're going through these contracts, reread these 11 do nots and shall nots in the RPA. When you're going to do your AVID, reread page 1 of the AVID, because it again sets some of that scope to remind you of the things that you shouldn't be doing. I know this sounds like, insomnia cure, but read the SBSA now and then, or at least go through that, because it'll remind you of issues that may or may not be important to your buyer in that specific transaction. It may remind you to recommend the appropriate professionals to your buyer. Don't just hand the SBSA off and expect them to read it and make decisions based on that. Make recommendations based on the things that apply to them. Another good form that you might use in this regard is the BIE, the Buyer Inspection Election. And again, it identifies 30 or 40 different areas of concern and investigation that the buyer may want to deal with. And again, gives you an opportunity to say who are the appropriate professionals that they should consult to deal with those issues. So staying within your lane. Again, it's not a matter of acting dumb. It's a matter of being smart and staying within the parameters of what your real estate license authorizes you to do. And it's the best way to stay safe and to really meet your clients' needs, and to let other professionals give them the guidance and that they need on those things. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to mention something I think is absolutely critical, that when you start the transaction, that is when you want to announce who the players are and who the specialists are. Because what happens is, as you go through the transaction, the further you go into it, the more you're the primary point of contact, and you're the perceived go-to person for all issues. So it's best to start at the beginning and explain what title and escrow does, what the lender does, what the inspectors do, and how they're going to interface with them, so that when an issue does come up, you can say, remember I told you This is regarding the prelim. I can't explain the prelim to you, but let's get on a conference call with the title officer and let's get an explanation on that. The other thing that I really want to strongly emphasize is referrals. I mentioned it already for inspectors. I would also say for attorneys, you don't want to have your favorite attorney that you're always referring to, because then that constitutes an endorsement if you're always referring the same person. We want to be very, very careful that we're not endorsing any of these service providers. One of the things that I've done in the past is if I do know somebody, I'll mention, hey, I'm aware of this person here, but I want to give you the search tool at the State Bar of California. And if you go in there and you do the advanced search, you can actually search by specialty, and then they can look up attorneys. And they're probably going to have to look up more than one attorney anyway, because it's likely that attorneys have conflicts of interest. They may have had a lawsuit against the party that you're dealing with, or the other, whatever, somebody else in the transaction. So they're going to have to get a multiple options. So it's good to posture yourself at the beginning to provide a very broad range of references and also an explanation of what all the players do.
All right. Well, that's all I have, Tori.
All righty. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's California Brokers Business Accelerator. Remember, if you do have any questions, your brokers are always there for you. Just go ahead and contact them at their appropriate email addresses. Again, thank you everyone for joining us on this month's California Brokers Business Accelerator. Of course, thank you to our brokers, Jeff, Tom, and Michelle, for all of your wonderful insight. And a special thank you to Steve for leading today's topic and presentation. Thanks again to everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful week and a safe Memorial Day weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.